Admiral Kale towered over the assembled delegates in the great council chamber, a mountain of a being whose very presence seemed to suck the light from the room. His dark armor gleamed under the artificial suns that lit the galactic meeting hall, and when he moved, the floor itself seemed to tremble beneath his weight. This was no ordinary military briefing. This was theater, and Kale knew exactly how to command his stage. The holographic display that materialized behind him stretched across the entire wall, showing fleet after fleet of Corvanian warships. Each vessel was a work of deadly art, their hulls pulsing with the eerie blue glow of quantum phase technology. The assembled delegates, representatives from dozens of worlds and species, couldn't help but stare in awe and terror at the sheer scale of the armada before them. "Behold the might of the Corvanian Empire!" Kale's voice boomed through the chamber, each word carefully measured for maximum impact. 10,000 warships, each one protected by shields that exist partially outside normal space. Your primitive weapons pass through them like light through glass, unable to even scratch our hulls. He gestured with one massive hand, and the display zoomed in on a single destroyer. Even this smallest vessel in their fleet dwarfed most other species' battleships. Energy readings scrolled past, showing power outputs that made several delegates gasp audibly. "Our quantum phase shields don't just deflect energy, they redirect it to another dimension entirely. We have tested them against stellar flares, against black hole gravity wells, against weapons that could crack moons. Nothing touches us. Nothing can touch us." The Corvanian admiral paused, letting that sink in. His cold eyes swept across the assembly, watching fear bloom on alien faces. This was what he lived for, the moment when entire civilizations realized how small and helpless they truly were. "But our defenses are merely the beginning," Cal continued, his voice dropping to an almost conversational tone that somehow seemed more menacing than his earlier booming declarations. "Our weapon systems channel pure quantum energy, focused through crystalline matrices that amplify destructive force by factors you cannot comprehend. We have deleted entire star systems from existence. We have turned thriving worlds into cosmic dust with single volleys." The holographic display shifted to show recorded footage of Corvanian fleet actions. World after world exploded in brilliant flashes of light, their populations of billions snuffed out in seconds. The silence in the chamber was absolute now. Even the most warlike species present seemed stunned by the casual genocide being displayed. In the human delegation section, Ambassador Jin Wu sat perfectly still. Unlike the other delegates who shifted nervously in their seats or whispered anxiously to their aides, the human representative appeared almost bored. His hands rested calmly in his lap, his breathing steady and even. When the footage of planetary destruction played, he didn't even blink. This composure did not go unnoticed. Several other delegates glanced his way, wondering if the human was in shock or simply didn't understand the implications of what they were witnessing. The Corvanian Empire has brought order to 3 entire galactic sectors, Kyle announced, as the display returned to showing his massive fleet. Hundreds of species now live peacefully under our protection, contributing their resources and labor to the greater good of galactic civilization. Those who resist, he gestured toward the images of destroyed worlds. Well, you have seen their fate. The chamber's artificial atmosphere felt thick and oppressive now. Many delegates were openly sweating despite the climate controls. Some species representatives had begun unconsciously huddling together, primitive instincts taking over in the face of such overwhelming predatory power. "The time has come for this council to acknowledge reality," Kyle declared. "The age of independent worlds and petty federations is over. There is only the Empire now and those who serve it. Each of your species will be assessed for tribute requirements. Those who comply will be protected. Those who refuse..." He let the threat hang in the air like poison gas. When the council chairman called for responses, most delegates sat frozen in their seats. A few stammered out immediate acceptance of Corvanian terms. Others requested time to consult with their home governments, their voices shaking with barely controlled panic. Then, Jinwu stood up. The human moved with deliberate slowness, rising from his chair like a man with all the time in the universe. Every eye in the chamber fixed on him as he stepped forward to the speaking platform. His footsteps echoed in the silence, each one seeming impossibly loud. "The Republic of Earth thanks the Corvanian Empire for their presentation," Jinwoo said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber despite its quiet tone. "We have heard your terms and your threats. Our response is simple. We request peaceful coexistence between our peoples." The words seemed to hang in the air for a moment before their full meaning sank in. Then Captain Vex exploded into laughter that echoed off the chamber walls. Soon other Corvanian officers joined in, their mirth growing louder and more mocking. With each passing second, "Did this primitive just refuse us?" Vex gasped between fits of laughter. "A species that still burns chemical fuel to reach orbit thinks it can negotiate with the masters of quantum physics?" Kyle raised one hand, and the laughter stopped instantly. His officers snapped to attention, but the amusement never left the Admiral's eyes. "Humans," he said the word like it tasted amusing. "Your species has barely crawled out of its home system. Your largest warships would serve as cargo shuttles in our fleet. Your weapons technology is centuries behind our most basic systems. And yet you dare to make demands." Jinwoo remained perfectly calm throughout the mockery. "We make no demands, Admiral, only requests. Humanity has no desire for conflict with any species." "How refreshing," Kyle replied with false warmth. "A species that knows its place. Very well, Primitive. Your Republic of Earth has 30 standard days to gather appropriate tribute. We suggest rare metals, advanced technology if you possess any, and perhaps a selection of your finest genetic specimens for our research divisions." The human ambassador nodded once, slowly. "I will relay your message to my government." "See that you do," Kyle rumbled, "and ensure they understand the alternative. Captain Vex will be happy to provide additional demonstrations of our capabilities, if needed." As the council session ended and delegates began filing out in nervous clusters, Kyle turned to his officers with satisfaction written across his features. "Deploy the Third Fleet to human space," he ordered. "If they attempt to resist, make their destruction visible to every inhabited world within 50 light-years. Fear spreads faster than any fleet." Captain Vex grinned with predatory anticipation. "It will be our pleasure, Admiral. How long should we give them to surrender?" "Oh, I think we'll let them make the first move," Kyle replied. "It's always more satisfying when prey struggles before the kill." The Corvanian Third Fleet moved through hyperspace like a pack of cosmic predators, their massive ships cutting through folded reality with barely contained power. Captain Vex stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the swirling colors of hyperspace stream past the viewports. Around him, his crew worked with the lazy efficiency of soldiers who had never known defeat. This was supposed to be easy work, a quick demonstration of power against a species so primitive they still used chemical rockets, the kind of one-sided slaughter that would send messages across the galaxy about what happened to those who defied the Empire. Vex pulled up the latest intelligence reports on his personal display, scrolling through page after page of human military data with growing amusement. Their so-called battleships were smaller than most Corvanian patrol craft. Their weapons were laughably outdated, kinetic projectiles and basic energy beams that would barely scratch modern hull plating, let alone penetrate quantum phase shields. "Captain," his communications officer called out, "Admiral Kyle is requesting an update." The holographic display shimmered to life, showing Kyle's imposing figure aboard his command ship several light-years away. Even through the quantum link, the Admiral's presence filled the bridge with its weight. "Report, Captain Vex," Kyle commanded. Vex couldn't hide his amusement as he gestured toward the intelligence data floating around him. "Admiral, I'm beginning to think this mission is beneath our capabilities. The humans' largest warships barely qualify as frigates by our standards. Their heaviest weapons are kinetic cannons, actual physical projectiles launched at sublight speeds." Kyle's expression remained stern, but Vex caught a flicker of satisfaction in the Admiral's eyes. "Continue." "They use primitive energy arrays for ship-to-ship combat, the kind of technology we abandoned centuries ago. Most amusing of all, they still rely on physical hull armor for protection instead of proper energy shielding. It's like they're stuck in the technological dark ages." The bridge crew around Vex chuckled at this assessment. Several officers leaned in to look at the human ship designs, pointing out particularly outdated features to each other with obvious entertainment. Their entire fleet doctrine appears based on overwhelming numbers rather than technological superiority, Vex continued. They cluster their ships together in tight formations, presumably to concentrate firepower. Against an enemy with similar technology, it might even be effective. But not against us, Kyle observed. Not even close, Admiral. Our quantum phase shields will make us completely untouchable to their weapons. Meanwhile, a single volley from our main batteries could vaporize dozens of their ships. This won't be a battle, it will be target practice. Kyle nodded slowly, his mind already moving to larger strategic concerns. Ensure that word of their destruction spreads quickly. Deploy. Sensor drones to record everything. I want every species in this sector to see what happens to those who refuse the Empire's generous offer of protection. Already planned, Admiral. We'll broadcast the engagement on all standard frequencies. By the time we're finished, every government, within 100 light-years, will be reconsidering their position regarding tribute payments. The holographic connection flickered slightly, as quantum interference disrupted the signal. Kyle's image stabilized after a moment, his expression as cold and confident as ever. How long until you reach their system? The Admiral asked. 72 hours at current speed. Should we accelerate the timetable? No, Kyle replied after a moment's consideration. Let them sweat. Fear has a way of growing stronger when given time to fester. They'll spend those 3 days knowing death is coming, and being completely powerless to stop it. Meanwhile, across human space, a very different kind of preparation was taking place. On New Sol Station, the largest civilian habitat in the outer colonies, Commander Bo Young moved through corridors filled with controlled chaos. Families hurried past carrying essential belongings, while station personnel guided them toward waiting transport ships. Unlike the panic-stricken evacuations often seen in war zones, this movement had an almost rehearsed quality. People moved, quickly but without pushing or shoving. Children stayed close to their parents, and elderly residents received assistance from younger station workers. It was clear this wasn't humanity's first time facing overwhelming odds. Status report, Bo Young called to Lieutenant Sujin as they reached the main docking bay. Sujin consulted her tablet, scrolling through endless lists of names and ship assignments. 87% of non-essential personnel have been evacuated. The remaining 13% are volunteers who insisted on staying to help with final preparations. And the military families? All cleared as of 6 hours ago. The last transport is loading now. Sujin gestured toward a massive civilian liner being loaded with the final group of evacuees. Bo Young nodded, watching as the last families boarded. The transport. Most carried only small bags. Everything else had been left behind. Children pressed their faces against portholes, taking final looks at the only home many of them had ever known. How long until the fleet arrives? Sujin asked quietly. 72 hours, Bo Young replied, her voice steady despite the weight of those words. More than enough time to finish preparations. The lieutenant looked around at the nearly empty station, its corridors now echoing with an eerie silence. Do you think the plan will work? Bo Young was quiet for a long moment, watching the civilian transport undock and begin its journey toward the inner systems. It has to work, Sujin, because if it doesn't, those children we just sent away won't have a home to come back to. Back on Earth, in the heavily fortified war room beneath Geneva, Admiral Hyun-Soo stood before a wall of tactical displays showing ship movements across human space. Each screen told the same story, civilian populations streaming away from the outer colonies while military assets moved into carefully planned positions. The Admiral was a man who had seen more than his share of impossible situations. His weathered face bore the scars of conflicts that had shaped humanity's expansion into space. Battles fought against raiders, rebels, and hostile alien species. But this was different. This was extinction-level different. Captain Da-Un approached. With a fresh stack of reports, her footsteps echoing in the tense quiet of the command center. Around them, dozens of officers and technicians worked at their stations, coordinating the most complex military operation in human history. Admiral, final evacuation reports are coming in, Da-Un said, handing over the latest updates. Hyun-Soo, took the reports without looking away from the tactical displays. Summarize. All non-combatant vessels have cleared the outer colonies. Civilian casualties during evacuation were minimal, fewer than 100 across all stations combined. Military personnel are in position and ready to begin the operation. The Admiral finally turned to face his aide, and Da-Un was struck by the weight she saw in his eyes. This man was about to order thousands of his people to their deaths, and he felt every single one of those lives like a physical burden. Any word from the other species? Any offers of assistance? Da-Un shook her head. Nothing official. The Centauri Federation sent a private message expressing sympathy, but they're not willing to risk Corvanian retaliation. The other powers are maintaining diplomatic silence. Hyun-Soo nodded grimly. He had expected as much. Humanity would face this threat alone, just as they had faced so many others throughout their history. Then we begin, he said simply. Around the war room, officers began initiating the final phase of their preparations. Orders went out across human space, activating plans that had been months in the making. Ships moved to their assigned positions. Weapons were brought online, and crews prepared for what many of them knew would be their final mission. The trap was being set. Now all they could do was wait for the predators to arrive. The Corvanian Third Fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, like a swarm of metallic locusts, their massive hulls blotting out the distant stars. Captain Vex stood on his flagship's bridge, expecting to see human ships fleeing in terror or broadcasting desperate surrender messages. Instead, his sensors detected something that made him pause. 6 small ships hung in space near Pluto's orbit, their hulls scarred and patched, but their weapons powered and ready. These weren't the sleek warships he'd seen in intelligence reports. These were older vessels, the kind of ships that looked like they'd been fighting for decades without proper maintenance. 6 ships, Vex said aloud, his voice carrying a mixture of amusement and disbelief. They sent 6 ships to face our entire fleet. His bridge crew erupted in laughter. Sub-Commander Nex, a veteran of dozens of conquest campaigns, shook his head in amazement. Captain, their largest vessel is barely the size of our shuttlecraft. This will be the shortest battle in Imperial history. Vex studied the tactical display more closely. The human ships were arranged in a loose formation, their weapons trained on his fleet, despite the impossible odds. There was something almost touching about their defiance, like watching insects try to fight a boot. Analysis of their vessels? Vex asked his tactical officer. Ancient designs, Captain. Their lead ship appears to be a converted civilian hauler with military weapons bolted onto the hull. The others are various patrol craft and what looks like a mining vessel that's been retrofitted for combat. The captain of the human formation, a man named Taiho, according to intercepted communications, opened a channel to the Corvanian fleet. His face appeared on Vex's screen, middle-aged, weathered, with the kind of calm expression that came from accepting impossible odds. Corvanian vessels, this is Captain Taiho of the Earth Defense Force. You are entering sovereign human territory. Turn back now or we will be forced to engage. The bridge fell silent for a moment, before bursting into even louder laughter. Vex wiped tears from his eyes as he responded to the transmission. Captain Taiho, I am Captain Vex of the Corvanian Imperial Navy. Your bravery is admirable, but your situation is hopeless. Surrender now and your deaths will be quick. Taiho's expression never changed. I'm afraid that's not an option, Captain. All ships attack formation Beta. Engage at will. What happened next defied every expectation Vex had about human tactics. Instead of trying to maintain distance and use their superior maneuverability, the human ships charged directly at the Corvanian line. Their weapons opened fire while they were still far outside effective range, filling space with streams of kinetic projectiles and energy beams. Predictable, Vex muttered as he watched. The human weapons splash harmlessly against his ship's quantum phase shields. The energy barriers shimmered like soap bubbles as the attacks passed right through them, unable to interact with matter that existed partially outside normal space. Taiho's ship reached the Corvanian formation first, its engines pushed far beyond safe limits. At the last second, the human captain sent a final transmission, not to the Corvanians but to someone else entirely. Detailed sensor readings, energy signatures, shield resonance frequencies, all transmitted in a compressed data burst. Then his ship slammed into Vex's escort frigate at full speed. The explosion was spectacular, a brilliant flash that lit up the darkness of space. Debris scattered in all directions, chunks of human ships spinning away like metallic confetti. But when the light faded, the Corvanian frigate hung in space completely undamaged, its shields having absorbed the entire impact without even flickering. 1. Down, Vex announced to his crew. 5 to go. But something nagged at him as he watched the remaining human ships continue their desperate charge. That transmission Taiho had sent just before impact, it hadn't been a goodbye message to his family. It had been tactical data, detailed information about Corvanian shield interactions. The second human ship, commanded by a woman whose voice sounded impossibly young over the communications channel, approached from a different angle. Her weapons fire was adjusted to different frequencies than Taiho's had been, and she held her fire until much closer range before opening up with everything she had. The result was the same. Weapons fire passed harmlessly through quantum phase. Barriers and her ship exploded against shields that might as well have been solid walls, but again that final data transmission went out just before impact. "They're learning," Subcommander Nex observed, his earlier amusement fading into something closer to professional curiosity. "Each captain is adjusting their approach based on the previous attack." "Irrelevant," Vex replied, but his tone lacked its earlier confidence. "Their weapons cannot penetrate our shields. All they're doing is dying more creatively." The third and fourth human ships attacked simultaneously, coming in from opposite directions, in what appeared to be a coordinated pincer movement. Their weapons fire was synchronized, aimed at the same shield section from different angles. For just a moment, Vex thought he saw the barrier flicker under the combined assault. But no, the shields held firm, and both ships met the same fate as their predecessors. More explosions, more debris, more futile heroism against impossible odds. Yet something was definitely changing. The fifth human ship, a converted mining vessel that looked like it had been built from spare parts, managed to get closer than any of the others before its weapons were neutralized. Its captain, an older man with silver hair, actually managed to score what looked like a direct hit on a shield generator before his ship was destroyed. The hit did no damage, of course. The quantum phase barriers were designed to withstand stellar-level energy outputs, but the fact that the human had known exactly where to aim suggested a level of tactical sophistication that their ramshackle ships didn't display. The final ship approached with almost casual confidence, its pilot making no attempt to evade Corvanian return fire. This captain was different from the others, younger with the kind of intense focus that suggested extensive military training. She flew her ancient patrol craft like it was an extension of her own body, dancing through space with impossible grace. Her weapons were calibrated to frequencies that no previous human had tried. Her approach vector was calculated to take advantage of what Vex now realized were minute gaps in shield coverage. She transmitted more data in those final seconds than all the previous captains combined. When her ship exploded against the Corvanian shields, the barrier actually did flicker for a split second before reasserting itself. "Interesting," Nex commented. "They're getting better at this." Vex stared at the debris field that was all that remained of the human patrol. 6 ships, 6 crews, 6 captains who had charged into certain death without hesitation. Their sacrifice had accomplished nothing tactically. His fleet remained completely undamaged and ready to continue toward Earth. But something about the engagement bothered him. The way each attack had built on the previous one, the steady improvement in targeting and timing, the increasingly sophisticated data being gathered and transmitted. It was almost like, "Captain," his communications officer interrupted his thoughts. "We are receiving another transmission from deeper in the system." A new face appeared on the screen. Another human captain, this one aboard a ship that looked slightly more modern than the patrol vessels they'd just destroyed. Behind him, Vex could see what appeared to be a small fleet of similar vessels approaching their position. "Corvanian fleet. This is Commander Jinsu of the 2nd Defense Squadron. I'm afraid you'll have to go through us next." Vex looked at his tactical display. 12 more human ships, all of them larger and better armed than the patrol they'd just annihilated. Still hopelessly outmatched, still doomed to the same fate as their predecessors. But for the first time since entering human space, Captain Vex found himself wondering exactly what game the humans thought they were playing. Because one thing was becoming clear: this wasn't random desperation. This was beginning to look suspiciously like a plan. The Corvanian fleet carved its way deeper into the Sol system, like a predator moving through familiar hunting grounds. Captain Vex had settled into a routine now. Human ships would appear, charge bravely at his vessels, die spectacularly against impenetrable shields, and then the next group would emerge to repeat the same futile process. Near Jupiter's orbital zone, another cluster of human ships materialized from behind the gas. Giant's largest moons. This time there were 8 vessels, slightly better armed than the previous groups, but still laughably outmatched. Their formation was tighter, more professional, suggesting these were regular military units rather than the converted civilian craft they'd been facing. "Here we go again," Vex muttered to his bridge crew. "How many does this make?" 43 human vessels destroyed so far, Captain," his tactical officer reported. "0 damage to our fleet." The human commander this time was a woman who introduced herself simply as Captain Mi-young. Her ship was a sleek destroyer that looked almost modern by human standards, though it was still generations behind Corvanian technology. When she opened communications, her voice carried the kind of calm authority that came from extensive combat experience. "Corvanian fleet, you are approaching Mars territorial space. Withdraw now or face the consequences." Vex didn't even bother responding anymore. The pattern had become so predictable that he'd started using these encounters as training exercises for his junior officers. Today's lesson was on shield harmonics and energy absorption rates. Mi-young's squadron attacked with textbook precision, their ships moving in coordinated formations that would have been impressive against any conventional enemy. They targeted specific points on the Corvanian ships with surgical accuracy, concentrating their fire on shield generators and weapon systems with the kind of tactical knowledge that suggested serious military intelligence. But precision meant nothing against technology they couldn't touch. The human weapons blazed against quantum phase barriers that existed partially outside normal space, their energy simply passing through without interaction. It was like trying to punch a hologram. All the skill in the world couldn't overcome the fundamental impossibility of the task. "Look at that." Vex pointed to his tactical display as Mi-young's ships executed a complex flanking maneuver. "They're actually quite good at this. Against an enemy with conventional shielding, they might have done some real damage." His sub-commander Nex nodded appreciatively. "Their tactical doctrine is sound. Concentrate fire, exploit weaknesses, maintain formation integrity. If this were a fair fight, it would be interesting. But it wasn't a fair fight. It was a massacre dressed up as a battle. Mi-young's ship was the last to fall, charging directly at Vex's flagship with weapons blazing at maximum power. In those final seconds before impact, she transmitted the same kind of detailed sensor data that every previous human captain had sent. Energy readings, shield frequencies, impact measurements, all of it carefully recorded and broadcast to receivers deeper in the system. The explosion when her ship hit the shields was particularly spectacular, bright enough to briefly illuminate the entire battlefield. But when the light faded, Vex's flagship hung in space without so much as a scorch mark on its hull. "Another suicide run," Vex commented, watching the debris scatter into the darkness. "Do they think courage alone will somehow overcome the laws?" Dear physics. What Vex didn't know was that far behind his advancing fleet, Admiral Kyle was beginning to see a pattern that deeply troubled him. From his command ship at the rear of the formation, the Supreme Commander of the Third Fleet had access to detailed tactical analysis that painted a very different picture of the human attacks. Each engagement was being recorded and analyzed by the fleet's central intelligence systems, and what those systems were revealing made Kyle's blood run cold. The human attacks weren't random acts of desperation. They were methodical, scientific, and growing more sophisticated with each encounter. The first wave had attacked with standard tactics, probing the Corvanian defenses with conventional weapons and recording the results. The second wave had adjusted their frequencies based on that data, fine-tuning their approach. The third wave had found slight variations in shield strength at different angles of attack, and so it continued, each group of human ships building on the sacrifices of those who came before. They were dying not to win battles, but to gather information. Each explosion was a data point, each heroic charge a carefully calculated experiment. They're not trying to win, Kyle realized suddenly, his voice barely audible in the quiet of his command bridge. His chief of staff, a veteran officer named Commander Thex, looked up from his own tactical displays. "Admiral?" "The humans," Kyle said, his voice gaining strength as the full implications hit him. "They're not trying to defeat us, they're studying us. Every attack is designed to gather specific data about our shield systems." Thex pulled up the tactical logs, reviewing the recorded engagements with fresh eyes. What he saw confirmed his Admiral's suspicions. The human attacks followed scientific methodology, controlled variables, incremental adjustments, careful data collection. "Sir, if they're mapping our shield frequencies, then every ship we've destroyed has been an investment," Kyle finished grimly. "The question is, what are they investing in?" Meanwhile, on Earth, Admiral Hyun-Soo stood in the war room, surrounded by banks of quantum analysis equipment that hummed with activity. The data streaming in from each engagement was being processed by the most advanced computers humanity had ever built, teased apart by algorithms designed to find patterns in chaos. Dr. Yoon-ji, the lead physicist on the quantum analysis team, looked up from her displays with barely contained excitement. "Admiral, we're getting incredibly detailed readings. Each engagement is filling in more pieces of the puzzle." Around her, dozens of technicians worked frantically at their stations. Some were tracking energy signatures, others analyzing shield harmonics, still others working on weapon targeting solutions. The war room looked more like a research laboratory than a military command center. "Status report," Hyun-Soo ordered, his voice cutting through the controlled chaos. "Shield frequency mapping is at 97% accuracy," Dr. Yoon-ji reported. "We've identified the primary harmonic resonances and most of the secondary variations." Commander Jae-min, hunched over a bank of tactical computers, added his own findings. "Power fluctuation cycles have been confirmed. The Corvanian shields follow predictable charging patterns with brief vulnerability windows every 3.7 seconds. Lieutenant Sang-ho, monitoring communications intercepts, raised his hand. "Admiral, we've also mapped their formation protocols and command structure. Captain Vex appears to be operating under specific rules of engagement that limit his tactical flexibility." Hyun-Soo studied the master tactical display that showed the positions of every ship in the system. The Corvanian fleet was still advancing toward Earth, leaving a trail of human debris in their wake. But that debris represented more than just loss of life. It represented the most expensive scientific experiment in human history. Every ship that had died had been equipped with the most advanced sensors humanity could build. Every captain who had charged into certain death had known exactly what data to collect and how to transmit it in those final crucial seconds. They had given their lives not for victory, but for knowledge, and now that knowledge was complete. "Dr. Yoon-ji," Hyun-Soo said quietly, "are we ready?" The physicist looked at her displays one more time, double-checking calculations that had been verified dozens of times already. "Admiral, we have everything we need. The weapon modifications are complete, targeting solutions are locked in, and our ships are in position." Hyun-Soo walked to the communications console and activated the fleet-wide channel. Throughout human space, on ships hiding behind asteroids and in the shadows of planets, crews who had been waiting for this moment sat up straighter in their chairs. "All vessels, this is Admiral Hyun-Soo," he announced, his voice carrying across the solar system. "Our people have paid the ultimate price to bring us this opportunity. Their sacrifice will not be in vain. Operation Ghost Protocol begins in 60 minutes. All ships move to attack positions. It's time to show the Corvanians what humanity is really capable of." The trap that had been months in the making was finally ready to spring, and the hunters were about to discover they had become the hunted. Admiral Kale's massive flagship hung in space near Luna's pale surface, its dark hull reflecting the light of distant Earth. Around him, the Third Fleet had arranged itself in a perfect battle formation, thousands of ships positioned with mathematical precision for maximum destructive effect. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the culmination of weeks of slaughter that would serve as the ultimate demonstration of Corvanian power. On his command bridge, officers moved with the confidence of beings who had never known defeat. Every screen showed the same story. Human resistance had crumbled before their advance, leaving nothing but debris fields and the echo of futile last stands. The primitive species had thrown everything they had at the fleet, and it had all been swept aside like dust before a storm. Final approach vector confirmed, Admiral, his navigation officer reported. All ships are in position for planetary bombardment. Kyle studied the tactical display showing Earth hanging vulnerable in space below them. The blue and green world looked so peaceful from this distance, its cities glittering like scattered gems across the continents. Soon, those lights would be extinguished forever, another lesson written in fire across the galaxy. Energy levels at maximum, sir, his weapons officer announced. Planet Cracker systems are fully charged and ready. The Planet Cracker was the crown jewel of Corvanian military technology, a weapon that could literally tear a world apart from core to surface. It had been used only 3 times in the Empire's history, each deployment serving as a final argument that ended all resistance in entire sectors. Today would be the 4th. Prepare the Planet Cracker, Kyle ordered, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Let every species in this region of space witness what happens to those who defy the Empire. But as his crew began the final activation sequence, something impossible happened. Space itself seemed to shimmer behind Luna's bulk, and ships began emerging from what had appeared to be empty vacuum. Not the ramshackle converted civilian vessels they had been destroying for weeks, but sleek warships that looked like they had been forged from starlight itself. These ships were different. Their hulls were smooth and dark, covered in patterns that seemed to shift and flow like living metal. They moved with predatory grace, accelerating from concealment to attack speed in seconds, and there were dozens of them, more than the combined human forces the Corvanians had already destroyed. Where did they come from? Sub-Commander Nex demanded, his earlier confidence evaporating as more ships continued to materialize. Captain Vex, monitoring from his position in the fleet formation, felt ice form in his veins as he recognized what they were seeing. They were hiding behind the moon, in its gravitational shadow. Our sensors couldn't detect them. But it was more than just concealment. These ships radiated a technological sophistication that the previous human vessels had completely lacked. Their engines burned with contained stellar fire, their weapons charged with energies that made space itself ripple around them. Captain So Young commanded the lead squadron, her voice cutting across all frequencies with crystal clarity. All ships, weapons free. Target their shield generators. Frequency 7.324, phase variance 0.02. Remember, every shot counts. Our people didn't die for nothing. The first human volley came without warning. Beams of coherent energy lanced out from the newly revealed fleet. But these weren't the primitive weapons the Corvanians had been deflecting for weeks. These beams were tuned to exact specifications, calibrated to frequencies that had been purchased with the blood of heroes. The beams hit the Corvanian shields and did something that had never happened before in the Empire's long history of conquest. They went through. The quantum phase barriers that had made the fleet invincible simply weren't there anymore. The human weapons sliced through them like they were made of paper, striking hull plating that hadn't been touched by enemy fire in centuries of warfare. Corvanian ships erupted in brilliant explosions as their own power systems, suddenly exposed to direct attack, overloaded and detonated. The pride of the Imperial Navy, vessels that had conquered star systems and reduced civilizations to ash, became debris drifting in the cold vacuum of space. Impossible, Kyle screamed as his flagship shuddered under impacts that should never have reached its hull. Our shields are impenetrable. Nothing can bypass quantum phase technology, but the human weapons continued to find their marks with surgical precision. Each shot was targeted at specific points: shield generators, power conduits, weapon systems, striking with the kind of accuracy that could only come from intimate knowledge of Corvanian ship design. Commander Jun Ho's voice crackled over the communications channels, his words carrying across the battlefield to every surviving Corvanian vessel. Every ship that died brought us this data, Admiral Kale. Those brave captains who charged your lines, who died against your shields, they weren't failures. They were investments. The truth hit Kale like a physical blow. Every human ship they had destroyed had been gathering intelligence, recording shield frequencies and energy patterns with scientific precision. The primitive attacks hadn't been acts of desperation. They had been the most sophisticated military intelligence operation in galactic history. They were mapping our defenses, he whispered, understanding flooding through him like poison. Every attack, every suicide run, they were learning how to kill us. Around him, his command crew worked frantically at their stations, trying to adapt their shield frequencies to counter the human weapons. But it was too late. The humans had months of detailed data, recordings of every possible shield configuration and power setting. They had built their weapons specifically to exploit vulnerabilities that the Corvanians didn't even know existed. Ship after ship of the Third Fleet died in spectacular explosions. The quantum phase shields that had made them gods among mortals were useless against enemies who understood them better than their own creators. Within minutes, thousands of years of technological superiority had been reduced to scrap metal and expanding gas clouds. Kyle's flagship was among the last to fall. As human weapons tore through his hull and systems began failing around him, he managed to send one final transmission to his homeworld. His voice, once filled with absolute confidence, now carried only defeat and terrible understanding. "Command, this is Admiral Kyle," he gasped as smoke filled his bridge and emergency lights bathed everything in hellish red. "We were wrong. The humans, they let us think we were the hunters. But we were always the prey. They were studying us, learning from us, preparing to destroy us. Everything we did only made them stronger." The transmission cut off as his flagship exploded in a ball of superheated plasma, taking with it the last remnants of Corvanian arrogance. Hours later, across the galaxy, the major powers received an identical message broadcast on all diplomatic frequencies. Ambassador Jin Woo appeared on their screens, his expression as calm and unreadable as it had been during that first council meeting months ago. But now there was something different in his eyes, a quiet strength that spoke of battles won and prices paid. Behind him, the lights of Earth glittered peacefully in space, unmarked by the violence that had raged just beyond its atmosphere. "To all civilized species," Jinwu began, his voice carrying clearly across interstellar distances, "the Republic of Earth wishes to inform you that the Corvanian Third Fleet has been destroyed while attempting to attack our homeworld. We took no pleasure in this action, but we will not hesitate to defend ourselves against any aggressor." He paused, letting that sink in before continuing. "We prefer peace with all species. We believe in cooperation, trade, and mutual respect. But if you choose to threaten humanity or our allies, you will discover that we are very, very good at war." The message ended with images of the debris field that had once been the most powerful fleet in known space. Ships that had seemed invincible just hours before were now nothing but twisted metal drifting in the void, monuments to the folly of underestimating humanity. Across the galaxy, military leaders and government officials stared at those images and came to the same conclusion. The balance of power had shifted. The age of Corvanian dominance was over, and a new player had entered the cosmic stage. Humanity had announced its arrival not with boasts or threats, but with the quiet confidence of a species that had learned the most important lesson in the universe. Sometimes the greatest strength comes from being underestimated by your enemies. The hunt was over, and the galaxy would never be the same.